Welcome back to Are You Being Real? We have an amazing guest today in the house, the one and only Tommy Sobel.
Hello.
Tommy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Your first podcast, I hear.
I know. I'm so, I said I was not nervous when I came here, and now I'm like feeling a little jitter, so we'll see how this goes.
I'm going to try to make it as painful as possible.
Thank you.
No, but Tommy, I really wanted to have you on the show because you're awesome, and we met in Israel and we didn't really get the chance to dive in. So I'm excited to get to know you better.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm also super intrigued by your brick movement, which I know you'll talk about here in today's show. But we have a parallel vision in terms of how we can utilize technology for good. So I was really excited to dive in on that topic with you. So that's where we'll go in today's episode and kind of just see where it flows.
Let's do it.
Sound good?
Yeah.
So one thing that I love to do when having these conversations is just to dive right into the deep end. So I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a story from your life sometime that was perhaps really challenging, when your authenticity was challenged, you maybe just didn't know what to do. And I'd love to have you take us right in there. Tell us what it looked like on the outside, how you felt internally, what you did next, and what you learned.
Cool. So I have a story. This is a story that I told for the first time, actually, when we were in Israel together to my cohort. So I'll start. So for the people that aren't aware, we have to bring these artifacts to the trip. And so I brought this Uniball pen, and I showed everyone the pen. And that was a special artifact in my life because in 7th grade, I remember on Valentine's Day, everybody was getting like their secret Valentine cards of the people that had secret crushes on them. And I had my envelope and I opened it up and there was like a Uniball pen in it instead. And I broke down crying.
But those have such good ink flow.
What?
They have such good ink flow. I love those pens.
They're great pens. Yeah, I think I brought one. But because I was known my whole life as the Uniballer, because there was a rumor that I had one testicle.
What?
And so when I was in the story, it all started because when I was in 2nd grade, I had a hernia and I didn't quite know what it was. And I came back after a couple days in the hospital, I think, and I had this like little teddy bear gauze pad or something, and I was showing off to my friends. And I remember this one dude, Peter McCarthy, was like, "Oh my God, what happened to you? Did you lose one of your balls?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so. I think I did." And the next thing I know, like that became like what I was known for. And cut to like as we were getting older, as I started like dating people, girls were like, "Oh my God, why are you hanging out with the Uniballer?" As I actually started dating, they would say, like, "Is it true?" for like the girls that I was dating. And I remember with my friends, they, it was like the joke. It was, I was kind of like, and it wasn't true. So I would often try to like prove that it wasn't true, and like would threaten to like show everyone in like elementary school or middle school that like I had both of my balls.
You're like, "I have 3 balls."
Yeah, exactly. I was embarrassed and couldn't really do that. And it got to a point, I remember even high school, where like I did like show my friends and they were like, "Well, there's like that scar down the center, which is, something that we just develop with." And they're like, "So it could be like an implant." And so still like this kind of fake news, you could say, like continued throughout my whole life. And it wasn't only until I went to college where nobody knew that history about me that I realized that story, it no longer had like an impact on my life. And so as I grew up and as I look back now, I realized that I was basically like ostracized and wronged, and that's why when I got this Uniball pen, it was kind of like bullying. Just one example of being bullied as I was growing up for something that simply wasn't true, that I felt like I couldn't really prove. And so from that, I I kind of made this decision that I didn't ever want anyone else to feel that way that I felt. And so I, as you know, we'll probably talk about with Brick and everything else, like I really, if I were to have like a why, it would be to make other people feel included and not be ostracized or kind of wronged in various ways. And so that like funny anecdotal story is kind of something I'll always have that I think has been awesome. So I thank my second grade friend Peter McCarthy now for starting that rumor.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that and being so open with us, and something that wasn't even true was something that you carried with you for lots of years until you went to college.
Yeah.
That's wild. I'm just curious, like, how did that make you feel through all those years?
I was definitely like embarrassed by it, and also had like a super conventional parent upbringing where like I felt like I couldn't even really talk about it. So I would kind of talk about it, and where like I couldn't show people or I kind of like just turned the other cheek all the time. And I think that is kind of why. I remember we were like on the Santa Monica Promenade growing up, and there was this one girl who came up to a friend of mine, and she was like, "Why are you hanging out with the Uniballer? Like, why are you hanging out with him?" Like, and I remember, and I overheard that randomly. I was like, "Holy fuck! Like, this really is affecting other people's opinions of me." And I felt disempowered, and I don't know what the right word is, but yeah, it definitely affected my self-esteem as I was developing, where I always kind of felt like an outsider. And I ended up spending so much time, most of my life, trying to be popular and trying to be cool, because I felt that if I could become friends with as many people as possible, they would see that I had certain qualities, and they would forget the rumors, and they would have their own opinion instead of the assumption. And so that maybe that's a good thing too.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us can relate in some way, shape, or form. I know that I went to a school in 7th grade, a new school, and was bullied when I went there, and it was so tough and challenging to be in that kind of environment, and definitely had a lingering impact over me for the next several years. So I'm just curious, when you did go to college, I'm sure it was kind of like a new muscle being in this new environment where that story didn't exist. So I'm curious, was there anything, like any moments where you felt like you really stepped into a new version of yourself, or you really walked away from that old story?
It definitely wasn't in college where I feel like I found myself, or where I like kind of gained the confidence that I feel like I have now. It was college was I think college was kind of like a stepping stone towards it, where I actually like felt like those were my most difficult years, where like I think just like self-confidence and self-esteem when you're 18, and I felt like somehow I was like younger than everybody else. I felt like I had less life experience, and everyone else was felt like they had like a much stronger head on their shoulders. And so I think it's kind of I wouldn't say it's like a rock bottom, but I feel like in terms of self-esteem, knowing my like state of mind in college makes me so appreciative of my state of mind now, and like knowing the life experience I had from that is able to, it's kind of like that yin and yang of knowing where I came from.
Yeah, it's so interesting in that it's fueled your passion and your purpose now to make sure that everyone feels included. Yet at the same time, like I bet it felt miserable. I know it felt miserable for me in all the years that I was bullied. And it's like, it's really a shame, because it's tough to be a human. And it's like even tougher to be a human when other people are like making shit up about you and like giving you a hard time, when like on the flip side, like, what if we learn to actually support each other and be loving and encourage each other? What would be possible? Yeah. So I love that that's what you're being a pillar for. I didn't know that story, but I knew of another story that you had that involved a pen. So this is like a trend that there's pen stories.
Oh my God, you're so right.
So I'd love if you could tell us about this other pen story, which seems very different than the other one.
True. So after I graduated college, I was working on set on this movie Tintin, which was an animated film, but it had a 30-day motion capture shoot. I was Kathy Kennedy's on-set assistant, who's the producer of the film. It was a Steven Spielberg movie, and he had his own on-set assistant, and he had his whole team. And I remember he was looking for a pen, and like no one in this circle of people on set had a pen, and I was just kind of like the first one to grab a pen. And that was my first interaction with this, this master, this, kind of crazy figure that I couldn't believe, I actually exists in real life.
Was it a Uniball?
I don't know. It might have been. I have no idea. It probably was. And then, that turned into me after that film, as it was described to me, being poached by Kathy Kennedy to work directly for him, which then started like this whole really crazy, cool, exhilarating, difficult career path as his assistant, and then an executive at his company, which I finally left about a year ago. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. And I imagine so many people have the dreams of working with Spielberg.
Yeah.
Would you say it was like being in the right place at the right time, or anything else that you exhibited that you felt like was the key to getting that opportunity and your success there within?
Definitely right place, right time. I think that people like that, they have so many people vying for their attention and so many people trying to get in the door that they, for better or for worse, tend to like reduce the number of relationships that they have, that they kind of like really trust. And so I think the only opportunity was to kind of come in the side door and work for someone else that he trusted. And so I had also worked on set for Kathy on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And so it all kind of felt like baby steps towards working for him.
That's awesome. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Spielberg because I want to talk about you, but I am curious, what's the greatest lesson that you learned from him?
People like that that are like truly masters of their craft. I mean, I think that when you think filmmaking or like a director, like Spielberg's the first one that comes to mind. He really is an American icon. We like sometimes would joke in our office that like it's almost like he's Santa Claus. Like people just want to like come and like not necessarily sit on his lap, but like just have an interaction with him. Like he's that special to people.
Yeah.
Because of his breadth of work and everything that he does. And so working for him and seeing that a guy like that is incredibly productive and shows up at the office at 8 a.m. every day, but also like goofs off and like has some unproductive moments, likes to just like go home early sometimes and watch a movie. It brought him down from this pedestal of like genius, this like unattainable thing that some people have and I don't have, to then be like, oh, this dude just like works really, really hard and he is incredibly gifted and he's been honing it since he was like 10 years old. But it humanized him, and I realized I can be like him too. And so I think like it gave me a lot of confidence that's like I could be in some scenario like a master one day of whatever it is I want to be.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. I know when I look at celebrities, and we live in a celebrity culture and we put celebrities on pedestals, and they are just real people. And it's like, if they actually let us see them, or if we saw more of them, we'd be able to identify our shared humanity and be inspired. I didn't work with Steven Spielberg, but Lewis Howes is one of my good friends. And without that shared humanity, that experience with him, I wouldn't have started this podcast. It, inspired me like, oh, I can speak my truth. I can create a platform, etc. You're a fascinating character. I know that you kind of started out in neuroscience and were published when you were like 23. So I'm curious, like, what piqued your interest to go down that path, and then what led you to film? And then I'm just curious, like, how that has evolved into Brick.
Cool. Yeah. So I I actually grew up like acting in LA, and I had like an agent and a manager, tried to be like a kid actor, didn't really get anything, but was always really curious about the brain and behavior. And so when I got into college, I decided to pursue pre-med, basically in case filmmaking or acting didn't work. I like to be a doctor as a backup, basically. And then when I graduated, I was actually doing neuroscience research at UCLA while I was working at Kathy Kennedy and Frank Marshall's production company. When I got the opportunity to work for Steven, I simultaneously finished this 6-year project where we were actually segmenting the cingulate gyrus of the brain into its various subregions through MRI scans. I don't know, it's cool to tell like girls on first dates that you're a neuroscientist, but it was like a very specific project. It was actually for a textbook for other neuroscientists. And I realized through that 6-year process that was both at Duke and UCLA that I love science, but I love the results of science. I don't love conducting the science research. And with this opportunity to work for Steven Spielberg, I want to go full on into film and spend all my time and focus on one thing, and bring my science interest into film and, try to make science cool again. About 5 years in, as his assistant, he then promoted me to the new media executive at Amblin. And so we had like a film branch, we had a TV branch, and then I was this like the first person in this new department in digital to say, okay, what are we going to do in VR? What are we going to do in podcasts? What are we going to do in interactive short form Alexa type content? And so that was, I think, a way for me to then start to use that muscle again of like, how can we take technology and plus storytelling together and make science cool and tell, super high level premium content with these new platforms. 2 years into that, we still didn't have a budget, and I was starting to get creatively frustrated that I really wanted to do something. And so I started developing Brick on the side, which I'll tell you more about. And then about 9 months ago, I left and have done it full time ever since.
That's beautiful. So I'm curious to hear the story of Brick. How you came up with the idea, how it unfolded, what it is. Take us there. So through the new media exec position, this like exploratory job, I was experiencing a ton of VR, and I basically saw how incredibly immersive VR was and AR, and how it truly was going to change the game in terms of presence and immersion with storytelling. And also then seeing that like Facebook bought Oculus for $3 billion. They didn't do that just for fun. They did it so that they could have a stronger grasp on the attention economy and really not just have our eyeballs through our phones and sell ads through that, but the moment they have us completely immersed in their world, it's like 100 times the amount of attention that we have. And so I saw, with my own addictions to social media and my phone, that we had to create better phone hygiene or better phone etiquette now or screen etiquette now while we still could, because the moment mass adoption for AR and VR, it's kind of like game over. So I felt that it was kind of like a ticking clock, that we really had to find this balance, raise the ethics of our balance with technology while we still could. And then also was talking a lot with all these big YouTubers who lived their lives and like made their bread and butter like on these constant releases of content on YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat, and seeing how unhappy they were. Mm-hmm. That these like young kids were living the life kind of and had all these great millions of followers, but felt like they were in this rat race and could not detach, and truly were prime examples of the costs of this always on culture that we have kind of fallen into. I almost said created, but I feel like we have created it, but not consciously. Yeah, I hear you. I know that brands, it's in their best interest for us to use their technology and their apps as much as possible. It's good for advertising, all those things. And we're still I believe in free will, but like we still choose where we want to spend our time. And yes, they hook us in ways that maybe we don't realize. Like we don't have to be on our phones for like 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's a choice.
But we do. Yeah. And that's kind of like where Brick came out of, where I felt like I was not in control of how I spent my time. And I needed a structure in place to incentivize and basically like what it ended up being like to gamify the lifestyle that I wanted to lead, that, I wanted to spend less time on my phone, but there was nothing in place to make it easy and cool and social. Mm-hmm. And so that is what turned into Brick.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So how does it work? Tell us more about it.
So the way that I kind of pitch it is we're a grassroots movement for young people that are dissatisfied with their relationship to technology and social media. I envision this world where we use technology to make us more present instead of making us more distracted, which is the way it often is today, mm-hmm. and to make us feel more connected instead of more disconnected, or isolated, which is also, I think, what how we feel today. And so we have a daily challenge to our community, and that's to brick your phone for at least an hour every day. To brick your phone means to set it down, put it in airplane mode, or what we call brick mode, which is this iMessage auto reply that you can set up just through like this 5-step process. Basically turning your phone into a brick, and then you go do something engaging in the real world.
Hell yeah.
And then our job, there's 2 aspects to it. We throw phone-free events. So we have this community, the hub is in LA, and we throw these highly curated events for the Brick community that are all phone-free, and they're always kind of left of center and kind of with the purpose of creating meaningful connections. What we have kind of fallen into today with the always-on culture is, so Mark Zuckerberg has accomplished his goal. We are now all fully connected. The problem is that we have replaced our real-world relationships with relationships through technology. And there is dopamine that we get through the likes, and we feel good about the connections and the follows that we make, but it's just the notification, but it's just dopamine. And that's like empty calories, or it's like candy. And so the true meaningful connections, which is in the brain, the chemical oxytocin, that can only exist through connections in the real world. And so our events purposefully drive the oxytocin production. For instance, our last event was called an instant choir, and we got 60 people who were non-singers or shower singers only
shower singers
to show up, and the leading voice coach in LA took us over a period of 2 hours into singing a song as a live choir, and we sounded awesome. And he also the voice coach also is a researcher on how group singing is actually one of the fastest ways to create oxytocin between groups. And so there's a lot of science behind it, and we talked a little bit about that. At each event, we purposefully create some social scenarios that get people to go out of their comfort zones a little bit and to interact not just with the person sitting next to them at the dinner party, let's say, but make some meaningful connections with everyone. So that's kind of like the non-technical side of Brick. At the same, on the other side, we are in development on this app that basically incentivizes and gamifies phone-free time through actually collecting Brick time. So we're commodifying airplane mode, where you're collecting Brick hours, and we challenge you to collect at least 1 Brick hour every day. And then there's various in-app challenges to incentivize that time. Beyond that, we're working on like a bunch of other things, which I'll probably wait to share.
Fair enough. Beautiful vision, and so important. And I know we do yearn for that meaningful connection, yet we are incredibly addicted to our phones. In my TEDx talk last summer, I cited some slightly different stats than I read on your website, but that average person is like checking their phone 100 times a day and is spending over 4 hours on them. But I noticed on your site that you found some data that shows that people are spending actually closer up to 10 hours a day, which is absolutely wild. So I had a couple of questions just to dig in a little bit deeper in terms of that. You also have an aggressive goal. I read that you, like in a week, would love to spend 100 hours in brick mode.
Yeah.
And just to put that into perspective, that like is on average of what, 14 or 16 hours a day?
Yeah, I think it's almost all of the waking hours.
Okay. Except, so this is the math that I did because
Okay,
I dug into this. I
Math.
dug into it. So it's 14 hours a day is 100 hours per week.
It's for 7 days? Or
For 7 days.
Okay.
For
All right.
7 days, which means that if you slept 8 hours a day, because it only counts during the waking hours.
Yeah.
So that would leave essentially
2 hours.
2 hours.
On your
So
phone.
you'd be allowed to use your phone for 2 hours a day to get to 100.
Yeah.
So that's a goal that you have.
Yeah.
Or you had for a week or something like that.
Definitely.
So
I mean, the ultimate goal is based on this one research report that says that the healthiest amount of time to spend on screens a day is actually maybe 1 hour. That's super aggressive considering our lifestyle. I mean, right now what Brick's trying to propose is just 1 hour without your phone and see how that goes. But ultimately the goal is to spend as much time in the real world as possible and only use the digital realm as a tool and not as a place to live. There's like this famous quote that I feel like is super popular right now where it says like the internet used to be an escape from the real world and now the real world is like an escape for the internet. And I just think that that's such a sad truth for so many people. But yeah, I mean, I'm super inspired by the outdoors, and I feel like camping and basically my experience growing up as a Boy Scout, getting back to the basics and living in the wilderness is super powerful. And I think that that is for me kind of like the best example of checking out. And so when you're in the forest and, you know, ideally you spend like a whole week without your phone, that's I think the best way to totally reset the clock and realize how are you spending your time? How could you be spending your time on your devices purely as a tool and not just as a habit?
totally. And also a great way to tap into our intuition without all the noise.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to ask you about social etiquette because I know one of the elements of Brick and one of the things that it helps with is it has the notifications. So if someone texts you while you're in Brick mode, they get the notification that you're in Brick mode, that you're disconnected from your phone, and that you'll get back to them when it's convenient or something like that.
Yeah.
But we're always on. And without that kind of out of office assistant type of thing, people naturally are awaiting a response.
True.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious to know in terms of like just your opinion on social etiquette, like what is like a good response time? What's the best verbiage or messages that you've learned to convey that allow people to maybe understand your situation, together with like creating boundaries.
Yeah.
So people like don't hate you for taking a long time to respond or whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, the Brick mode that is the iMessage auto reply is our first effort to unwinding that cultural obligation to the feeling of the need to reciprocate immediately when people reach out to us. I feel like that's one of the biggest detractors of this always on culture that we're now in, where if you don't respond to someone in the normal amount of time, which depends on the type of communication, you start to feel guilt about how long it's taking. And vice versa, when somebody takes too long to reply to you, you start to get upset that they're either ignoring you or any number of things. And so we... the Brick mode auto reply is an effort to say, hey, like, I'm not on my phone right now. I'm not ignoring you. I'm like taking this me time. I'm checking out. This is like a daily out of office. And I will get back to you when I'm back on the grid, to kind of relieve that pressure from both sides, to say, if somebody were to message me when I'm not on my phone, I don't then come back to my phone with this notification flood, and I'm now behind on all of these texts and emails and other notifications, because that ticking clock started as soon as that person sent the message. And so this allows you to get off the grid more without feeling the risk of that guilt later. I think a lot of people don't put their phone down because they don't then want to come back from vacation. People don't take vacation because they don't want to come back from vacation with hundreds of emails that then, makes them fully behind. And so I think that this is I think the first step towards what ultimately needs to be a cultural boundary, where I I won't stop until turning your phone into a brick or some version of it is as common as brushing your teeth every day, where we all have this daily ritual to get off the grid for our mental health. And that's something that everybody accepts and appreciates just as much as like any other important daily habit.
So good. I have a few more questions on this because I'm so fascinated, and being someone who utilizes social media, who is a slave to social media from time to time, my emotions are impacted from by social media. I'm curious. You created Brick and you started utilizing it and challenging it. I think you spent 66 hours in Brick mode last week or recently. How has that impacted you in your relationships?
I think, well, what's super, super awesome about this whole process is I have a girlfriend that is so supportive of what our mission is. She will tell anybody that she hates her phone, and she broke the screen on her phone a couple days ago and was not upset about it. She was like, okay, great, now I don't need to reply to anybody, I have an excuse. She for me is kind of like an anchor and embodies the essence of the Brick community. I think people that really, really want this as a part of their lives. And so I am so thankful that I continue to look to her to be like, okay, yeah, this is working. This is something that you want. And her better than me, actually, we've created these rules that all are a part of it, where we don't use the phone in bed. We were just traveling for a couple weeks, and basically when we're together, it is wrong to be on our phones. And it's kind of, I think, the best example of what it should be ideally with any relationship and any time you're with other people, where phone time, I think, is a solo experience. The moment you're with someone else, if you're on your phone, you're not really with them, you're not being present. And so girlfriend, spouses, friends, even if it's a meeting, dinner party, anything, I think when you're in a social situation, that's not phone time. That should be phone free time or Brick time if you're down for that. And so with relationships, when we are at our best, it's the days where we've barely checked our phone, or maybe we just use Google Maps or Yelp to figure out where the closest restaurant is, and that's it. And it's just the phone is in the interstitial moments. It's not living our lives interstitially between the phone.
What's been the most challenging thing, when you find yourself in Brick mode?
I think that doing it every day, actually creating a routine, is incredibly important, but also the most difficult. I think it's super easy to forget, and it's very easy to kick the can down the road and procrastinate. I am most proud of myself when I am able to, have 2 hours of Brick time in the morning to read, and an hour or something at night. I like to say, so my favorite thing in the world to do is read, and I have this bookshelf in front of my bed that I wake up next to, but it's filled with 100 books that I haven't read that I just have bought at airports. And so I kind of have always looked up at it as this to-do list, and then somehow still found myself every morning on Instagram for 45 minutes and then again at night for 45 minutes. And so when I started to actually brick my phone for at least an hour a day and use that time reading, last year I ended up reading 28 books, or 38 books. I should probably know that. But I read a lot of books, and to do something that I already loved to do but wasn't doing felt like the greatest sense of achievement, because I was kind of taking back control of how I spent my time, and felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that I didn't really have in my life. And so, kind of faltering on that now as I'm trying to start a startup, but I think to answer your question, I think the consistency of it, just like trying to brush your teeth twice a day, maybe everybody
starting
else does
the habit.
Keeping the habit.
And I think the gamification within the app that you're building, I think will really make it more fun versus it feeling like just accountability.
Right. Exactly.
What is most real and challenging for you right now in your life?
I am trying to figure out the business model for Brick. I have like 3 or 4 big ideas, and I'm trying to figure out how to best test them. This is my full-time thing, and I'm trying to bootstrap it, and so that I can maintain what I see as the best value system. I think that once you start to get funding, there's a chance of competing for 10xing your business instead of staying true to what I think the true value is, which is helping people feel like they have more control of how they spend their time. And so I have this limited runway, and it's going to run out unless I figure out how to monetize this sufficiently and appropriately. And so that is on my mind. I was up from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. this morning thinking about it.
So you shared that vulnerable story at the top of the episode about the Uniballer, and I'm curious when you feel some of those same thoughts that you felt about yourself that maybe weren't the most encouraging, or when you were tough on yourself. How do you deal with those today when they come up?
I feel like today a lot of that is built in just like comparing, or in like comparison to other people. And I feel like it's very difficult for me to not like speak in cliche, but I feel like if I recognize that that's what I'm doing when I feel unstable, or I feel this like pit of anxiety in my stomach, that is like a portal for kind of like creating awareness. Like, this is something that makes me uncomfortable, or I feel less confident than I should be. And I think like realizing that, and then being like, I don't need to compare myself. Let me just, what is it that would be the most authentic for me in this situation? And then I do that.
As we wrap up the show, I have a few final questions for you. One of them is, how can we support you?
Cool. So Brick is a growing community with the hub based in LA. Anybody can sign up for Brick. We have like a monthly newsletter, and we have events in LA. I would love for anybody that wants to spend meaningful time without their phones to sign up. The website's gobricknow.com. If anybody is interested in being like a beta tester of the app, trying to get feedback, user feedback on what they like and what's confusing. And anybody that is in this space that wants to chat and talk about how we can create balance with technology. I think there's a lot of space, and the industry doesn't really exist yet. It's growing. And so I feel like it's this rising tide raises all ships type scenario. And so if you're in this space, or you want to get into this space, let's chat and try to make it happen. Grow the pie.
Hell yeah. Thank you for your leadership, pioneering this new space. What final words of encouragement do you have for listeners of the show?
It's interesting. I think that most often when people like want to chat about real talk, when they want to like be real, and they are an employee at a company, at a job, it's always kind of like, oh man, how did you do it? Or like, it seems like super risky that you, went off on your own and did this thing. And I think that anybody that's like not fulfilled in their life with what they're doing, and either knows what their passion is and they're not following it, or is not sure what it is. I just feel like life is so short, and to not be working towards something that is completely meaningful you is like, you're not being your fullest self. And so I say, don't like call me if it doesn't work out and blame me for it. But I say, like, leave your job and like go do what's meaningful to you, and like you will figure it out. I mean, I haven't figured it out yet, but I have never been happier, and I have never felt more aligned in my purpose and my like skill sets that I've built. I feel like it's all kind of led to this, and I feel like if everybody was able to do that and just kind of take that risk, now that I've done it, it really doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like something that I had to do. It's the anticipation of it that I think is the worst part. So leave your job and start your own company.
There it is. The one and only Tommy Sobel. Tommy, thank you so much again for everything. And now that we've done this podcast, now that you've listened to this podcast, a perfect opportunity to try out brick mode.
Yeah, do it.